Welcome to Shul.com. We are here at the ninth Seder in Surfside at the ninth Kollel, and we are reviewing a little bit of the history of what happened before Chanukah. So we started at the end of the destruction of the first temple, and we'll just do a quick review. The king that was at the time, the Jewish king, was Tzidkiyahu HaMelech. Nebuchadnezzar had given him actually the authority to rule over Israel, as well as some of the outer countries like Edom, Sidon, Ammon, Moab. He gave him nice authority, but Tzidkiyahu seemingly tried to overthrow Nebuchadnezzar. He violated what his grandfather Yirmiyah HaMelech had warned him. Yirmiyah Navi. He tried to warn the Melech, the Tzidkiyahu, don't go and overthrow Nebuchadnezzar. Instead, he went with a couple of those that wanted to do the coup. Nebuchadnezzar found out. He ended up killing the two sons of Tzidkiyahu HaMelech. Then he took out his eyes and he put him into jail for 26 years. And the day he got out of jail was the day that he had passed away, both Nebuchadnezzar and Tzidkiyahu HaMelech. Later on, Nebuchadnezzar comes, he pillages the Beit HaMikdash and he destroys it. He ends up passing away, and his son Evil Merodach becomes the king. You can, like, evil Murdoch almost. Evil Merodach. He was the king for about 23 years, and then his son Belshazzar becomes the king. Belshazzar makes a party. In the party, he takes out the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash because he was celebrating a total of 70 years from his grandfather and his father and him having the royal Babylonian conquest, taking over the Beit HaMikdash, being very proud. And he was also proud in that the Jewish prophets had said that it would be 70 years of exile, and then they're going to go back and rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And he made a count. He said it's 70 years. And nothing happened, so I guess what they said was a false prophecy. He took out the kelim in the Beit HaMikdash. While he was at this party, there were thousands of very important dignitaries, other kings, princes, princesses, queens. On the wall, they suddenly notice in the middle of the party, while they're using the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash, that a hand writes on the wall. Some say 4 letters. Some say 4 letters in a form of what's called atbash, in like a codified way, and some say it was the words. But in short, the message was written on the wall, Minna Minna Tikal Uparsin, which means originally none of his advisors were able to read it. It was written in what's called Ktav Ashuri. It's the way we write the Torah today, but it's not the way that we probably got the Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, because there was also something called Ktav Ivri. It could be this Machlokot, is how he got the Luchot, how he gave over the Torah. For today, we have it as Ktav Ashuri, and according to the Gemara, that was one of the changes that Sofer had done. So on the wall, it was written in Ktav Ashuri, and it was written in the Aramic language. So it was interesting. It was writing it in a new style typeset or font of Hebrew letters, but in Aramaic words. It was interesting. And it said, Minna Minna Tekalu Parsin, which the prophet Daniel, Ish Hamudot, who was there, was able to decipher this. And he said, Minna Minna means they counted, and they counted like Lemanot. God counted, and he counted everything you just did. And Takal, from the word like the Shkol, because in Aramit, the Tav is in exchange sometimes of the Shin. So Takal will be Shakal. They measured. God looked at all your deeds. He looked at all your deeds. He measured them. Uparsin, and you seemingly didn't have enough. He didn't have enough zechuyot, good deeds, to do what he had done of pillaging the Beit HaMikdash through his family and using the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash in a party that he was doing. I can assure you, it was a mixed party, men and women doing all types of sins, avodah zarah, giluy ararot, shifichut damim. And God said, because of that, you now lost your ability to be king and your kingdomship. That night, he didn't even care, Belshazzar. He went to sleep, and he was killed that night. Subsequently, the next king that came along was Darius from Madai. He ruled for about a year or so. Then some say he died, some say he gave it over to his son-in-law, who was Koresh. Koresh was the king in Paras. So we say Paras and Madai in the story of Purim. They were a joint empire that had taken over the Babylonians, and they would switch, I guess, between Madai and Paras, the kingdomship. So it looks like, because it says that Yavesh HaMadai is the father-in-law who originally became the king, gave it to the son-in-law in Persia. So it might have been that they married into each other, they were close to each other. Okay, this new king Koresh comes along, and he does Hachrazat Rosh Chodesh, Hachrazat, not Rosh Chodesh, Hachrazat Kodesh, because that's Hachrazat of the Rosh Chodesh they do now. Hachrazat Kodesh. He does this, what's called the law of return. He tells all the Jews, see, the Babylonians had a policy. Whenever they took over areas, cities, they would move people into exile so that they would have to learn a new language, be in a new place, new zone, new atmosphere. And what that would do is it would weaken the people and strengthen the Babylonians so that people would not rebel. Because people would rebel when they're very comfortable, they know the area, they know how things work, they know how the systems are. But when they were moved, that was the Babylonian thing, and that was what he did to the Jewish people as well. That he brought them to Bavel. That's where the word Bavel, lebalbel, in order to make confused, the people. So the Persians had a different policy. Their policy was, hey, listen, you pay taxes, you let us be in charge, we are the king, we run the place, and you can go back, go build your temple, go back home. And it was not only a policy for the Jews, it was a policy to anyone that was put into exile from the Babylonians in order to strengthen their stronghold in this new empire that they recently got. Remember, the previous empire was running 70 years. It wasn't a joke. And they took over the world. Just so you understand what this means, don't go so far. Look at in the last, in the 20th century, how we literally saw the Ottoman Empire fall by World War I, where they went from being a tremendous stronghold. We saw the British Empire fall in World War II, where of course they're still around, but they're nowhere near what was the British Empire at its peak. The sun never set on the British Empire. That's no longer true. Along with many independent, different countries that wanted to leave the Queen's authority. Some regretted it, as you see in some of the islands. Here, we're in Miami, you see in some of the islands, you hear from some of the locals sometimes that we're better off when the British were here. Yeah, but that's for a different discussion. But this new Persian Empire run by Koresh, they want to find charm in the eyes of the people. They knew that Nebuchadnezzar was a brutal king, and he was a cruel king. I read a couple stories of Nebuchadnezzar when he would take over other nations. Besides that, he would abuse their wives and take them as additional and rape and things like that. He would take the kings, and he was cruel to them. He would normally chop off their fingers and their toes, and he would starve them for days at a time out in the fields. And then he would invite all of his generals to come and have beautiful meats and steaks and lambs and different types of birds, and eat in front of them while they watch after 3 days of not eating. And then he would throw them just the leftover bones and let them fight over the bones. The reason I like to talk about these stories is you have to understand that you have to think of these people that were like they were Hitlers. Like when you think of Paro, you have to understand that these people were doing this on a daily basis. They hated Jews. They really went out of their way to be cruel. With Nebuchadnezzar, it happens to be, he was a terrible king, but we saw with the story with Tzidkiyahu that he did give him some rights, and Tzidkiyahu, unfortunately, didn't listen to Yirmiyahu Navi, and the Melech seemingly, had issues because of it afterwards. Okay, so now Koresh becomes the king. He tells everybody he can go back to Israel. They sent Zerubabel to Israel, Ben Shealtiel, along with some prophets. And unfortunately, only about 42,000 people go to Israel, not a big number. And the Navi tells us on Zerubabel that had the people actually followed him, had they actually gone into Israel with him and in the masses and made the proper teshuvah, the second Beit HaMikdash would have been the official and it would have never been destroyed. But because people didn't follow him, and they didn't, and don't forget, it was close to 52 years after the exile, and people were getting comfortable. People settled down. There were new countries. 52 years is 2 full generations, maybe going into the third. It's a long time. It's already a father born, living in a country. His son is already older, and now it's a new language. They're speaking probably Aramit in Bavel, and probably Lashon HaKodesh, but Aramit. And they set up yeshivas, and they set up schools and real estate, and they started buying. And Babylonia was, it was up and coming. It was the world's superpower. Even when the Persians took it over, it still kept its stronghold, while Israel was destroyed, and the entire Jerusalem was destroyed. There were wild animals all over: snakes, scorpions, tigers, hyenas. There were wild animals all over there. So people said, people who had tried to go back had gotten killed or gotten hurt, and nobody really wanted to take that risk and go do it. So not that many people went. Nonetheless, 42,000 Jews went. They started rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. Within a short time, came the Shomronim from they're called the Kutim. They're from a city in Bavel called Kuti that Nebuchadnezzar brought them, and the Babylonians brought them to live in Israel while the Jews were removed. And they wrote what's called a sitna, a bad letter, a harmful letter, accusational letter to Kodesh, the king, saying the Jews are rebuilding their temple because they want to overthrow the Persian Empire, and those people were called the Sorer HaYehudim. It's not surprising that when you look at the Mefarshim tell us, who those were. Besides the Shomronim and the Kutim, they were the 10 sons of Haman that got hung in the story. That was part of the revenge, the Nekama, to take back because they had prevented the building. So what they only had been able to do is just the foundational work. They weren't able to actually build, and for 18 years, the Beit HaMikdash was not built. So 52 years, they started going back, they started the construction of the foundation, and now 18 years, they stopped. And so you have to remember, Haman was very well connected in the political world. He was well connected from the Babylonian side, the Persian side, the Madai side. And so then after 18 years, lo and behold, Kodesh is killed. That's normally how these kingdoms times end. He gets killed, and who comes over? Achashverosh. Achashverosh comes over. Now he seemingly is smart. Don't underestimate this guy Achashverosh. He marries Vashti. Vashti is the daughter of Belshazzar. She's from the Babylonian Empire, which got annihilated and killed. So he is a stable boy. He was a stable boy of Belshazzar, and he wanted to kind of secure his position in the royal family. So he marries who would have been the queen, Vashti. She was the one who held the royalty. This guy, Achashverosh, had no royal blood in him. He had no blue blood. He was just a regular guy who through murder and working himself up the ranks, took the position to be king. And he was successful. Don't underestimate him. He was very successful. And he probably did it with a few individuals around him. Haman probably was one of them, because it tells us he was his advisor. So now you understand why he probably was willing to kill Vashti on his word. What do you mean? Who's this guy, Haman? Why do you listen to Memuchan? Why suddenly this guy has authority? Right. He probably helped him to get his position. He probably helped him, and he was probably involved with sending Kodesh the letter, getting to stop the Beit HaMikdash, setting pieces up in place. And so suddenly when he tells him kill Vashti, he's like, look, this guy is giving me a lot of advice. The reason I'm here is maybe because of him. And it could be. I'm throwing that out there only because when we learn the story and you put these pieces together, it starts to make more sense. Like, why would he randomly listen to someone? Sometimes we read the stories really quickly and we don't get into the detail of it. Okay, so now, at this time, there is Achashverosh, is the story of the Nis Purim. I told you we're getting to Chanukah, so we need to go through a little bit of the process. So, the story of Purim happened 5 years after Esther HaMalka becomes the queen. She was, after Achashverosh kills Vashti, it takes 4 years to find a new wife, because the husband of Esther HaMalka, Mordechai Yehudi, is hiding her for 4 years. But after 4 years, she's discovered, brought to the palace, and she gets married to Achashverosh. So it says here, 5 years after she's the queen, The story of Purim is the miracle. Mahalach Adrim Hayakach, Hapalat HaPur Bishnat 3404. So in the year 3404 of the Jewish calendar, that's when they did the lottery. That's 356 years in BCE, before the Common Era. So you have that. 12, the Malchut Achashverosh, the 12th year of the kingdom of Achashverosh. He was only king for 14 years.
Really?
That's it. Nes Purim, Dahainu HaNitzachon B'Milchama Mul Kol HaAmot, the winning of the battles and the war, Bishnat 13 the Malchuto, in the 13th year of the 14th year of Achashverosh, Ubishna Zo Haita Simcha Mishtel Yehudim. That was when it all happened. So it was a short-lived thing. After a year, Achashverosh was out, but the next king was a good king. You'll see that. Chagigat Nes Purim Hechel Mishnat 14 the Malchuto. So in his 14th year and the final year of Achashverosh was when they started making the holiday, because in the 13th year, that's when they actually did the battle. So that was not a remembrance Purim. That was the real Purim.
Right.
It was the following year, and the last year of the Achashverosh being the king, that they actually did a remembrance of the previous holiday. Of what happened. To read the Megillah, to do all the mitzvot. In the 13th of Nisan was when the lottery was taken. And that it would be Yom Yud Gimel Adar. So on Yud Gimel Nisan he does the lottery, Haman, that on Yud Gimel Adar, 11 months later, they're going to, he wanted to destroy the Jewish people. And on the day of the 13th of Nisan, they sent out the letters that they were doing this. Right away they sent out. Once they did the lottery, this stuff got sent out. And then Tet Vav Bepesach V'Tet Zayin. Wow. And so Esther Malka, right away, she knew the letters were sent. On that day, she made a fast. For 3 days, they fasted. And they didn't do Pesach that year. Pesach was canceled that year. Okay. B'yom tet vav asta Esther mishte rishon lamelech v'Haman. On the 15th, which was the second day of the fast of Nisan, she made the party for the king and Haman. On the following day, which was the 16th, that was when Mordechai, the Achashverosh, commanded Haman to take Mordechai on the horse, to take him around town. And then after the second party, Talu le'et erevet Haman al ha'etz, they hung Haman on the tree. So it was really quick. It was 14, 15, 16. Wow, it was 3 days, and she was fasting.
Wow.
By this until the second party. Shneimar ve'yashavta Haman memacharot haPesach. Mordechai katav v'shalach et ha'igrot be'oto shana bekaf gimel b'sivan shnat 3405. V'hem nechtav she'edim yecholim להתגונן בפני כל אויב שיקום עליהם. On the 23 of Sivan, so now that this was all in Nisan, right? Then comes the month of Iyar, and then comes the month of Sivan. On the 23 of Sivan, Mordechai finally has now authority. Esther is already in the palace. She's married to Achashverosh. Haman is killed. He starts to write letters, and that's in the year 3405 and 355 in BCE, that he writes that the Jews can now defend themselves against the enemies. Because Achashverosh said, you can't pull back my original letters. We don't pull things back in my kingdom. If I write a letter and I stamp it, I don't say we pull it back, but I'll write an additional letter that says the Jews can defend themselves and they can fight back, and I'll support them. Achashverosh was a wild character. Even with all this that happened, listen, he hated the Jews as much as Haman did. Don't kid yourself for a minute. ובהם נכתב שהיהודים יכולים להתגונן בפני כל אויב שיקום עליהם. נפילת המן הייתה לאחר 5 שנים שהיה בתפקידו האדם בנעלה. Haman's position was a 5-year in the cabinet of the king, in the advisors. בשנה הבאה ביום י' ג' באדר גברו היהודים על אויביהם. On the 13th of Adar of that year, there was the war. That's why we have Tanit Esther this year. We don't, this year, every year, on Purim. Why do we do Tanit Esther on Yud Gimel? Not because we're commemorating the fast that Esther did, because she fasted in Nisan on the 14, 15, and 16. So why are we fasting? We're fasting because they went to battle. And usually when they went to battle, they would fast on that day for Zichuyot. Yeah. So we're reminding on that day of the day that they fought and the fact that they fasted on that day. 75,000 enemies of the Jews were killed that one day. The following year, they did the 14th of Adar for unwalled cities. And the 15th for the walled cities from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. And there's a whole discussion, why Yehoshua ben Nun? What does he have to do with this whole situation? In short, I'll give you a short answer. There's many. We spoke about this in Masechet Megillah. It's really beautiful how we connect Yehoshua ben Nun. Yehoshua was one of the first to fight Amalek, and this was a story of Amalek. Furthermore, what's the simple reason is that at the time of Shushan, of Nes Purim, what was happening in Israel? Israel was for the most part desolate, because even though they had started the Beit HaMikdash, it was halted for 18 years. This was the new king Achashverosh. We're going to talk about how it ended up being, reenacted to allow them to build. But all the walls of the walled cities in Israel were broken through from the Babylonians. Right. So it would have been very disrespectful to all the walled cities in Israel that ended up getting rebuilt. That when it comes to Purim, on a holiday, we're going to give more honor to a city called Shushan in Iran or in Persia, or today might be Hamadan or whatever, one of those cities, than the city in Israel. So they said, no, let's backtrack it to the time of Yehoshua ben Nun for a few reasons. One, because he started fighting with Amalek, and for a few other reasons in order to give honor to those cities, and then as well the city of Shushan. Okay. So he says a hint to it is on the pasuk ki yad al kes ya, ki rashi tevot kol Yisrael, yad dahainu beyud dalet adar al kes Yerushalayim nachshevet kis'o shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ya kelamar tetvav adar. Okay, very nice. He makes a small thing on ki yad al kes ya, which is a pasuk, and he says that using this with the rashi tevot kol Yisrael, yud dalet is the 14th. Al kes ya on the tetvav adar. Okay, nice. Okay, now Malchut Darius Shani. So now is the second Darius. There was one earlier that was for 1 year. Now there's a new one. This Darius Shani, they called him Darius the second. Yesh Omrim Bena Shel Esther HaMalka. This was the son of Esther from Achashverosh. Umalach Acharei she'Achashverosh nirzach al yedei echad me'avadav. Achashverosh gets killed by one of his slaves. Darius Malach Megil Sheva b'meshech 36 shanim. So at age 7, when his father is killed, Achashverosh, he becomes the king for 36 years. Lebasof, at the end, Huvas, he was defeated. Tseva'o bidei Alexander Mokedon, Alexander the Great from Macedonia. He comes in with his battalions and he crushes the Persian Empire and Darius. But seemingly, Alexander Mokedon שהיה חותנו של דריווש בשנת 3442. He was the says here חתנו, the son-in-law of Darius. I don't know how that could be, but that's what it seems like. Hatano says he's the son-in-law of Darius, Alexander. Maybe Alexander, he gave him one of
but he came after Achashverosh got killed?
Yes. Now
that had nothing to do with that.
Yes, he wasn't around. No, this was Darius. Okay. Ach Darius atzmo hamshich limloch od 6 shanim. Okay. So it says that for another 6 years after Alexander had taken over Darius' empire, he allowed him to be the king for 6 years under his authority. But as Bishnat 3448, 312 BCE, Nirsach al yedei echad me'avadav, Darius was also killed by one of his slaves at the end of it. So I guess the Persians ended up marrying into Alexander the Great's family. That's what it seems like. But I know Alexander the Great had no children. He did have a girlfriend called Roxanne, or a mistress, and she did have a son who subsequently was killed not long after Alexander was killed. So Alexander died. So yeah, so the baby was killed. Right, I think he died Alexander, age 32. It was very, very young. Okay, and we'll go into that whole thing because the Gemara talks a lot about Alexander the Great, and we're going to get to an important part. So he comes at this point to Darius. He ends up winning. It seems there's some marriage in between the families. At the year now at 3442 to the Jewish calendar, or 318 BCE, is what we have written here as the Sof Nevuah, which means the end of the prophecy. It's the end of the 48 prophets of the male, 7 female that get their prophecies written. It also means the end of the Tanakh, the 24 books of the Tanakh closed. Beshana zo Paska Nevuah Israel, prophecy ends from Israel. Mishemetu Acharone Nevi'im, the last of the prophets, which are Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Malachi is Ezra HaSofer. We know that from the Targum, the first pasuk of Malachi. And what's also, then you also have Mordechai Yehudi. He's also Petachia. You also have him as the 48. Then you have the 7 females which got written. Those are Sarah, Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, and Esther HaMalka. She's one of them. So Esther and Mordechai are the last prophets of it. And it seems that Esther HaMalka was the last prophetess, which means prophecy ended with Esther HaMalka.
Finished.
Meaning the last one to speak to God in that form of prophecy was a female.
Wow.
That's what it seemed from. We're learning. By the way, this is from Sefer Dorot HaKatzer, Shlomo ben Izri. The reason I say that, sometimes I tell you this all the time, right? We learn sometimes books back to back that argue with each other and different opinions. But that's what I want. I want to be able to present all the opinions. So here you're going to see, like, sometimes we're going to present one opinion that this is what happened, and tomorrow I'm going to show you, oh wait, no, this one was the last one. But for the sake of the way he's coming up with it, it seems that she's the end of it. I brought this when I did a whole dirasha on Purim, that based on that, it could be that the next prophet is a female first. Could be. I don't have any source for this. But it could be that it ended this way, because the reason why I said that is that if you look, I was learning from Rav Yosef Shani in Israel. Zerubabel came to Brooklyn once. He wrote a book, Tikvat Shani. I after speaking to him, watching him teach, learning with him, reading his book, I fell in love with his style and what he has to offer. He only teaches in Hebrew. And he has a whole discussion of what is going to happen when the Mashiach comes. And beforehand, so he gives you the process. He tells you, hey, look, he has to come to this city, he's got to go here, he's got to do this. I want to do like a whole thing. And one of the things he says is that he's got to go back to the original place where the Sanhedrin ended in Tveria by the Kinneret. He's got to go back to that original place. He's going to have to bring another 70 rabbis that are from the current generation, and then he's going to present to the 70 rabbis that are from the generation who he thinks the Mashiach should be, and they're going to have to vote him in. And once they vote him in, then he becomes the general, and he goes and he fights some battles, and he seemingly wins, and then that's it. Seder Shevatim come in. So he has a whole thing. So when I studied that, based on his research, that was how he concluded with it, I said it could be, based on the way you're teaching, that the prophecy will go back in the same capacity to a female first, and then carry itself to others. And listen, it does say, B'schut nashim tzadkaniyot nigalu avotenu. So listen, I'm putting it out there. So it's only my little hidush that I put in there. And I don't have a source for it yet. There's lots of books and lots of things, and I'm sure I'll find the source for it. It's interesting to point out, Rabbi Breitowitz was talking about this the other day, is that there seemingly is a within the confines, of course, of the Torah and of the guidelines of the Torah, where a person can be mehadesh and come up with new ideas and understanding based on the text. If it doesn't argue with halakha, if it seemingly stays away from the halakha and psak halakha mindset. And this is why you'll see many times Rishonim who have argued on Tannaim and Amoraim in the Gemara in regards to stories of the Tanakh. How could you argue on them? They predated you by 1,000 years. So, and the Ibn Ezra is one of the also rabbis who you'll see argues on everybody for that matter. He always has a creative, unique approach, in his kedusha of how he wrote, and he always has it. And right away it explains that when it's not a halacha issue, there is a little bit more room. Obviously, not to the extent that sometimes it could be taken. It's obviously with the Yirat Shamayim and within the guidelines. But and every generation there should always be someone who looks at the Torah, teaching the Torah, and being mehadesh chidushin, that of course fit into this mindset. Binyan Bait Sheni. Okay, so Binyato Hechele B'Shnat 3408 LeBeri'ah 352 BCE B'diuk 70 Shana La'achar Churban Bait Rishon, 70 years. So that's now the 18 years are over where they got prevented. They're now rebuilding the temple. It was a 5-year building process. The first Bet HaMikdash took 4 years. The second 5 years. How long did the Mishkan take? Mishkan, very easy. How do I know? They started collecting right after Yom Kippur. Within 4 days, Moshe Rabbeinu said, for the first time ever, a fundraiser ever said this, is that we over-collected too much money. People, close your wallets. It never happened again. That was the first and last time.
Yeah, exactly. So Mishkan took 4 days?
No, so listen, 4 days to collect the money, and then came Sukkot,
right.
And they celebrated Sukkot because what happened on Sukkot? The clouds of glory came back. They were missing from the time of Chet HaEgel. And so Bnei Israel was so happy that God finally returned to them the clouds of glory. It was such a warm feeling and a cloudy day, no pun intended. Why? Because the clouds came back and they weren't able to see the sun. So it was a cloudy but happy day. Everyone's upset about cloudy days. I look at cloudy days, this is the Ananei Kavod.
Sure.
And so they had the holiday, and then they finished it on which day? 25th of Kislev. So how many months is that? You had Tishrei, you have Cheshvan, Kislev. That's it. It's about 2.5 months.
That it took to build
Yeah. So the Mishkan was about 2 months and a little bit more. And then when it came to the first Beit HaMikdash, 4 years, second Beit HaMikdash, 5 years.
But when they were in the desert, I kind of got the impression that because they were moving around so much, that they were building it a lot quicker than that.
2.5 months. How much quicker than that? It's pretty good.
Yeah, no.
They're in the desert. I mean, they did have a lot of vessels and gold and silver and copper and metals, and they pillaged all of Egypt before they left. And they borrowed all their garments and things like that. So, listen, they had a lot of stuff, and they were very handy. There were a lot of craftsmen too, as well. So, and don't forget, they also had the Erev Rav with them. The Erev Rav were something like 3 million people, according to one opinion.
So the shortest, for as many times as they moved, you're saying the shortest period of time would have been 2.5 months?
No, so that's the time, from the time that they collected until they finished the construction of the Mishkan.
Okay.
So from the time, and then what happened on Kafhei Kislev, so that year on Kafhei Kislev, they finished the Mishkan, they finished the Miluim, and they were going to inaugurate it. And Hashem said, no, don't. I want you to wait till Nisan, wait till, the month of the birth of Yitzhak Avinu, he's Olat Tamimah, move it then. And then the month of Kislev, 25th of Kislev, and the month made a claim in front of God, said, you took away a good luck, mazal, a holiday from me. Why'd you do that? Right. God said, don't worry, I'm going to return to you another one later on in history, which will be one that will be very, very important. And it's interesting because, of course, the celebration of the Mishkan was on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That seemingly ended up being the day Nadav and Abihu died. And they were Kohanim. And then who were the family that ends up helping the battle to win the battle is the Kohanim, Hashmonaim. So there's a lot of connections there. We don't understand why God does certain things. The Hakamim did give us a couple of flavors into understanding and tasting it, but there was something there. Okay, Mishinato Hashniya Shel Daryavesh Ad Shana Shishit. Okay, so it took 5 years to build it. Binyan Ze Amad Al Tilot 420 years. So 420 years it stood. The second Beit HaMikdash, the first one 410. It was really 414 the first, minus the 4 years of construction. בנייתו החלה למעשה 18 שנה קודם זמן קודש, אך הופסקה עקב הלשונות והלילות הכותים בפני קודש שהפסיק את העבודה. That's why I told you it got an 18-year delay. Okay, עליית עזרא הסופר ונחמיה על שני אנשי כנסת הגדולה. So now Ezra הסופר and Nehemiah, as you'll see, those were the last few books in the Tanakh, ends up putting together Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, 120-man group, and they end up going to Israel. He goes up in the 7th year of Darius, V'imo alu kohanim, leviim, meshorerim, ve'od rabbim. So he took with him a lot of people, but not that many. Tekufat Anshe Knesset HaGedolah Berosham Ezra Sofer. He puts together this group of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, which do a lot of things. They make major changes to the Jewish religion. Major. They end up setting up tefillot and criteria, new halachot. Ezra does takanot. He rewrites the whole Torah from Ivri to Ashuri. He adds dots on letters in the Torah.
Right.
A lot of things change. Chelek mehem hayu. Okay. Who were some of those that came on the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah? Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Nehemiah, Mordechai, who Bilshan. He had another name, Mordechai. They called him Bilshan, from the word Lashon, tongue. Why? Sheyadah 70 Lashon. That he knew 70 languages. Wow. He knew how to speak 70. Just as a small side note, the last I checked the Guinness World Records, I think it was 52 or 54 languages of an individual who lived in the 1950s. You know what? Let's check it up. Why not? Let's check up who has the Guinness World Records, just so we can appreciate Mordechai Yehudi, what he had brought to the world for languages. Let's take a look on that. Which person spoke the most languages? Okay, so it says here, I don't know if this is the Guinness World Records. It says here that Ziyad Fazah, born in Liberia is in Africa, brought up in Beirut and now living in Brazil, claims to be the world's greatest living polyglot, speaking a total of 59 world languages. So I guess this is the guy that's living today with the most. I remember reading there was a guy 52 or 54 languages in the Guinness World Records, but this is what I'm seeing under sciencefocus.com. I don't know if it's true, but that's what he says. But it still didn't beat the record of Mordechai Yehudi, who knew 70 languages. Just as a side note, when it came to the Sanhedrin, not everyone in the Sanhedrin needed to know 70 languages. If one person amongst the 70, then it's kosher, the Sanhedrin. If two, that was a great Sanhedrin. If three, that was like a fantastic. Right. To have three people to speak any of the seven languages is unbelievable. Just when I learned this, the respect that in my feeling now, Mordechai Yehudi, like you have to understand. Of course, this guy, I shouldn't say this guy. Mordechai is Kodesh Kodashim. But what I'm trying to say is it changed how I looked at the individual. This was a very worldly individual. It was Talmid Hacham. He was a prophet. He spoke 70 languages. Besides that, he knew, when Bigdan Bateresh, when they're trying, Bigdan Bateresh, they end up trying to overthrow the king. I'm going to ilkay the Inke. Right. It's just nice to see. Okay, he goes up with Zerubabel, Ve'od Rabbim, Sachakol 120 people total. Chayu, Bitkufa, Shel Ke'ed Dorot Lepachot. It was an 8-generation process, Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. So it spanned many years. Nehemiah Allah le'Eretz Yisrael kedei la'azor le'Achav b'shnat 34:26. Nehemiah goes up to Israel to help out his brothers. V'shahah ba'aretz 12 shana. He's there 12 years. V'lachar shesayem chazal leBavel el hamelech lehamshich lishato kesar hamashkim. Nehemiah went for 12 years to Israel. He helped his brothers. Then he went back to serve the king in Bavel, in Babylonia, as the Sar HaMashkim. He was in charge of all the drinks in the palace. Sham Niftar, that's where he passed away. V'acharav Amad Beno Meshulam. Afterwards, his son Meshulam, the son of Nehemiah, took over. Bebavel Nish'aru Yehudim Asher Hamshichu Leharbitz Torah. in Babylonia. The Jews stayed there. They grew in the Torah. They grew in learning in the yeshivot. Lebnei Bavel haya rosh gola mibet David, and they also put a descendant of Malchut Bet David as the head of their chief rabbi, the Rosh HaGolah. ראשי הגלה היו מנהיגים עליונים של הקהילה היהודית בעיקר לענייני חול. So they had like a chief rabbi on them. שהייתה להם סמכות מאת מלך פרס, and they had on them the samchut of the king of Paras, which means the king of Persia gave them not only authenticity but protection. That chief rabbi, he's under my authority. He works with the government. He gets protection. You can't violate what he says, and they give him like more power. So, but the heads of the yeshivot, Rosh Metifta, Rosh Yeshiva, and the Sanhedrin, they were only in Israel, not outside of Israel. Okay. Shimon HaSadik. Shimon HaSadik, he was from the last of the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, these 120 people. Yeshomrim Achiv Shel Ezra HaSofer. Some say it was the brother of Ezra HaSofer.
Of who?
Of Ezra HaSofer. Some say it was his brother. Shimesh 40 shana betafkid Kohen Gadol. 40 years as a Kohen Gadol. Talmido, his student was Antigonos, Ish Socho, the man of Sacho, Ubet Dino. That was one of his students. Antigonos yetzu shne talmidim letarbut ra'ah. From this student, Antigonos, he had two students that came from Antigonos who went off the path completely. There were Sadok and Baitos. Behem shekafrush betorah shebe'al peh. They went against the oral Torah tradition. They said it was only the written Torah. Whatever was oral is questionable. Don't listen to it. Upithu et kat hasidukim. They opened up a new group, a new religion under the name of Judaism, called the Siddukim, ve'habaitosim. These two groups. The Antigonos lo haya le'yeshivato ben zug u'mitoch kach lo nafla machloket bizmano. So for Antigonos in his yeshiva, there was no ben zug, there was no one else, so there was no machlokot. Meaning there were no arguments at the time. When Rabbi said something, there was no two opinions. It was just that was a one opinion. Everyone followed what Antigonos Ish Socho used to rule. It was his opinion, first and last. Also Rabbi Dosa lived in that time. He lived long life. All the way to Rabbi Akiva. Who was a very rich rabbi, Shishimesh 11 shana bekihuna gedula v'yashir gadol. He was 11 years as Kohen Gadol. Rabbi Elazar ben Harzon. Hamefagesh ben Shimon Sadik le'Alexander HaMokedon היה בשנת 3442, 318 BC, שהיה שנת 34 לביישני. Okay, so what happened? Let me tell you what happened there. 34 years into the Second Temple, Shimon HaSadik is the Kohen Gadol. Alexander the Great from Macedonia is going around taking over the world. And he seemingly gets note that the Jews are trying to rebel or something of the nature, and he decides he's going to come to Jerusalem and take it over. He comes to Jerusalem, and Shimon HaSadik goes out to greet him. So you can imagine he's coming, Alexander the Great, with all of the generals and the armies and the people, and they're bloodthirsty, waiting to come. And they were great fighters, don't forget. They took over everything. And they're ready to pillage Jerusalem. And suddenly they see Shimon HaSadik with all the Kohanim, probably Pirchei Kehuna also, which are the children. And they see, when Alexander sees him, he gets off of his horse and tells everyone, stop. He gets down and he prostrates and bows down in front of Shimon HaSadik. And everyone is shocked. How are you bowing down to the priest of the Jewish people? And at the time, it changed tremendously. So Shimon HaSadik, he tells everyone, this person that is here is the person that I see in my dream every single time I'm about to go to battle. Right away, he sees Shimon HaSadik, and he knows if I don't see Shimon HaSadik, he's not going to win, he doesn't go. So he says, because that he didn't realize this was all from the merits of the Jewish people, I'm not going to destroy the temple. You can continue to observe and do the way that you want to practice. And not only that, because he didn't destroy the temple, the name Alexander became a Jewish name. That year, all the boys that were born named Alexander. People go up to the Sefer Torah, name Alexander. You have Alexander in the Gemara.
Wow.
It goes to show you the things that we have for Alexander the Great, till today.
Yeah.
That he didn't destroy the temple is only 34 years in. And he probably would have. How do I know that he would have? Because you're going to see right now that when he dies and he passes away at his young age, his kingdom gets divided in 4. And for the sake of Jewish history, the two important ones are Ptolemy, the king, who takes over Egypt and North Africa. And then you have the Seleucids, who are the Assyrians that descend from the Greek, but they're not Greek. And they take over the northern part of Israel and northern above Israel and that area. So Israel is kind of in the middle between Ptolemy, one of the generals, and the Seleucids. And over the next hundreds of years, they fight each other through Israel as a proxy, and they're the ones who become the Yevanim. So now we go to Malchut Yavan Ba'olam. Now the Persians have taken over, even though Alexander is. Not the Persians, the Greeks take over from the Persians. And even though Alexander the Great is Macedonian, he's not even Greek, he goes under the title of Greece. His father, Philip, was the king of Macedonia, of Alexander. And just a side note, the king saw Alexander, his son, growing up, and that he was special. And he hired for him Aristotle to be his teacher. Go figure. And by the way, just as a side note, Harambam and the Gemara talks that Aristotle, was someone of great intelligence. Don't underestimate this. He said that he took the best teacher of the time. He looked at the generation, said, I don't care what it cost, and seemingly he taught him well. Because till today, we're talking about Aristotle and of Alexander the Great, and their effect on the world and history till today is felt. So right now we're going to Malchut Yavan Ba'olam. It's the kingdom of the Greeks in the world, the Nes Chanukah. So when does it start? 3448, the Jewish history, or 312 years before the Common Era. Just so we get a picture of it. Berosha Amad Alexander Macedon. Alexander the Great was at its head. 19 years old, he started as a general going around. Bishnat 3442 or 318. It's that time that he humbled Darius, that was the son of Achashverosh. Ubishnat 3448, 312 BCE. Begil 25, exactly 1,000 years after they left Egypt, at Alexander's age of 25, Shalat Kvar al 22 Medinot. He took over 22 major countries. Alexander. And it was at that time that they started to call it the empire of the Greek Empire under Alexander. Besof Yamav Shalat al Kol Ha'olam. At the end of his life, he took over the entire world. Begil 32 Hur al Vamet. At 32, he was poisoned and got killed and died. Umalchuto Chulka le'arba Sarav. His kingdom got divided to 4 different generals. Shilton Yavan be'Eretz Yisrael. The Greeks over Israel, Haya 180 shana bifnei habayit. 180 years the Greeks were in Israel, occupying the land of the Jewish people. Dehaino Mishnah 34 Labai Shani Ad Shnat 214. So from the year 34, which was the year of Shimon HaTzadik, when he meets him, that's when they started to have authority. They didn't destroy it, but they were there, and they allowed them to do everything they wanted until the year 214. This shows you 180 years. It was a big, long time. Hayevanim, Yorshav Shel Alexander Macedon, the Greeks, which took over after Alexander the Great, Himshichu et Shiltonam Beitzel Beshaltu Be'eretz Besach HaKol 180 shana. So the total of all of them was 180 years. Keshebesofam Shalat Antiochus Epiphanes Harasha. So Antiochus Epiphanes The wicked was the one that was at the end of it, which is the one that they took over. He was a Syrian from the Seleucids. He was the one who was fighting Israel, not to kill them, but to kill the religion and to Hellenize them. ובימיו הייתה גזרה נוראה והקשה ביותר שכתבו לכם על קרן השור שנמשכה 52 שנה. And it was on that time that they made them write on the horns of the shore, of the ox, they made them write that they have no God to Israel. Which means whenever they used to say that they fed this to the babies, but I don't know how often they would do that. Well, I only say that because the normal way was women used to nurse the children. So if they nursed the children, they weren't using these baby bottles, these keren hashors. But they would write on the keren hashor, maybe it was like a pacifier or something like that. They would write on the keren hashor that they have no God to Israel, and they made the children see it. They kind of remove them from the religion. Through the Chashmonaim, they were removed. And there were 5 children of Matityahu HaKohen, which were the names Yehuda, Yonatan, Yochanan, Shimon, and Elazar. There were the 5. Shayu HaGiburim, those were the strong ones. V'shekulam malchu lema'et Elazar shneherag b'sdeh HaKerev. They all ended up becoming kings except for Elazar, who was killed in battle. She'enchidu layevanim tebusa gilva be'ezrat naseh habore yiparach through miracles. Achar miken natu bet Chashmonai et resen hashiton aliseh b'meshach 103 shana. After the Chashmonaim took over, they ruled as kings and as Kohanim 103 years. Nes Chanukah hitrachesh b'shnat 3622. So the year 3622, 138 before the Common Era was when the story of Chanukah happened. Mishinazo ad 3648, 112 BCE. B'meshech 26 shana lo shata af umah b'Yisrael af milchamot hamakabim b'yavanim nemshechu. There were, for 26 years, there was no one else in the land of Israel that were bothering the Jewish people. But the battles of the Maccabim and the Yevanim continued. Even after they took over, they still had further battles in order to push back, taking over. Who came after the Yevanim? The Greeks, the Romans. And the Romans started to come in, and the Greeks now had multiple fronts. They had the guerrilla warfare of the Chashmonaim and the children of Matityahu, along with the Romans, and they slowly broke apart even further, from the Alexander to the 4 generals, and then the Romans took apart and bit apart pieces of it. Ishtaltut madurgat zo nimshecha 180 shana al churban habayit al yadam b'kibush haaretz, and it ended this whole thing with the Romans destroying the temple. After about 180 years, they destroyed it, and they ended up taking the entire land over. As a side note, the Romans did not intend to destroy the Beit HaMikdash originally. They just had very strict rules and wanted lots of taxes. That was their thing. And even Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai told Bnei Israel at the time, don't fight the Romans, because the Romans are not out for the religion. They're just, and the people said, listen, this is a political, they're very strict, they're giving us a lot of rules and regulations, a lot of problems. And he said, you're right, but they're not like the Greeks. The Greeks were specifically, abusing the girls. They were making laws that we couldn't practice. The Romans said, you continue practicing. They didn't like the Jews, but they were not going to attack if there was no rebellion. And they didn't listen to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, and seemingly because they didn't listen to him, they ended up taking this political issue to the next level. And the Romans came in, and they ended up pillaging the Beit HaMikdash, and then they ended up making a ton of gezerot and laws that were harsh to the Jewish people. But that was, the Romans would have preferred just everyone just pay your taxes and just leave us alone. Well, you guys could do whatever you want in your temple. But the moment it became a rebellion, they didn't want to hear from it, and they took it above me. And then you had the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, and you had different people from within calling the issue. Bezat Hashem will end here. Then tomorrow we'll continue a little bit more on the Chashmonaim. We'll do the chart of all the sons. We'll understand who was part of the story, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of a machloket on who exactly were these Chashmonaim? Were they the Kohanim or were they a different family? So we're going to talk about the Machloket. Rabbi Brodowitz brings down that it seems that there were two families. There was the family of Matityahu and the family of the Chashmonaim. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.